Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, a podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today, in order to discuss the current events in Jerusalem, my guest is Bedross Der Matossian. Bedross is a good friend and a good friend of the podcast. Born and raised in Jerusalem, he's currently a professor of modern Middle Eastern history at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm just going to mention here a couple of publications because they're important. He edited a book, Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century, published in 2023. And he also is the co-editor of the Routledge Handbook on Jerusalem. Or if you're interested, you can certainly find plenty of historical information from the early Jerusalem up to the contemporary times. So today we're going to talk about what's going on in Jerusalem following the outbreak of the war in Gaza, and see and discuss the question of the settlers' violence against the Armenian community in the old city of Jerusalem. But before we're going to discuss all of this and the situation of the Armenian Quarter, first things first, Bedross, welcome.
Thank you, Roberto, for hosting me again.
Now, as I said in the introduction, this is an important episode because we're going to talk about current events, and actually we're going to unpack what's happening specifically in Jerusalem and in the Armenian Quarter. But before we discuss that, I really want to ask, for the benefit of those listeners that may not be very familiar with the history of the Armenian Quarter in Jerusalem, if you can tell us a little bit about the history of the quarter and also about the history of the Armenians in Jerusalem and Palestine.
The Armenian presence in Jerusalem goes back to the 4th century with the discovery of the holy places by Queen Helena, mother of Constantine I, and the pilgrimage began from historic Armenia to Palestine to visit the holy sites. And with these pilgrims eventually started a presence in the quarter. And by the 7th century, Armenians had a bishop in the Armenian Quarter, and eventually thereon a patriarchate was established in the medieval period. And so the presence goes back to 1500 years. The name of the cathedral is St. James Cathedral, referring to the two Jameses, James the Lesser and the other one, the brother of Jesus. And the Armenian Quarter is a historic part of the old city of Jerusalem. It constitutes 1/6 of the old city of Jerusalem. And it had its own indigenous population of Armenians who lived there for centuries. And you had the Armenian Cathedral with its priest and the community. And these communities were, their first language was Arabic, but they were Armenians and connected to the Armenian Patriarchate and were living in the Armenian Quarter. The demographic picture changed as a result of World War I. And Roberto, you wrote a book about World War I and Palestine too. And with the arrival of the Armenian refugees as a result of the Armenian genocide, the demographic picture changed within the Armenian Quarter, and now the locals became a minority and the new arrivals became the majority. The locals were called Karakatsis as locals, and the new arrivals were called as the visitors, Zawar in Arabic, Zawar. And to that extent, there was a culture, kind of a clash between them because the local Armenians were their first language was Arabic, and those who came from the Ottoman Empire, specifically from Cilicia, such cities as Marash, Antep, and many other places, were Turkish speakers, and they did not know any Arabic, and their customs were much more belonged to the Armenian provinces in the Ottoman Empire. So the Armenian Patriarchate played a dominant role in saving the Armenians from the ashes of genocide, and eventually those who arrived in the quarter were embraced by the local people, local Armenians, and the modern Armenian community was formed in the interwar period. And Armenians, in 1947, prior to the repatriation of Armenians to Armenia per se, but 1,000 people, number of the Armenians in Palestine was between 15,000 to 20,000. We're talking about cities such as Haifa, Jaffa, Gaza even, and the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem, but also the Armenian Catholic, around the Armenian Catholic convent in the Muslim Quarter of Jerusalem. So Armenians lived all around these places, and eventually, with the improvement of Armenian economic status, you have a small section of Armenians who moved to the new city of Jerusalem, Talbiye, Bakha, and other places, and represented the bourgeoisie of the Palestinian society, along with the Arab Orthodox, along with the Muslim bourgeoisies, Palestinian Muslim bourgeoisies, along with the Catholic Arabs and many others. And of course, interwar period represents the improvement of the Armenian condition, the advancement of Armenian economic status, etc. But then 1948, the Nakba becomes a major blow to the Armenians. They lose their homes, and thousands of them are poured into the Armenian Quarter, and Armenian Quarter defends itself from the Zionist attacks, and around 44 Armenians were killed, and one of them is Bedross Der Matossian, my great uncle, as a result of Haganah shelling. He was killed in the Christian Quarter, closing his shop there. He was a jeweler. And to that extent, this was a major blow to the Armenians, and thousands of them left Palestine to other countries. And thousands of them became refugees once more. You see refugees as a result of the Armenian genocide, and this is the second round of being refugee in 1948 war. Under Jordanian rule, the Armenian community also kind of was stable, I should say. And in 1967, during the war in the Nakba, again they received another blow now, and that also led to the decline of the Armenian community. And towards the end, the first Intifada and the second Intifada, to that extent, also had an impact on the Armenians of Jerusalem, as many were involved in tourism, with shops, with etc. And then it was a major impact on tourism. Many of them have left to Canada, United States, and Australia. So this is kind of the brief history of the Armenian presence in the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem. Armenians consider Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem as a homeland. They don't refer to Armenians in Jerusalem. They refer to Armenian Jerusalem, because of the historic presence of Armenians in Jerusalem, because of the historic connection of Armenians to Jerusalem, and within the collective memory of Armenians, Armenian Jerusalem does not constitute a diaspora. Within itself is a small country that Armenians belong to, and such a thing does not exist in any other place outside Armenia, historic Armenia. The Armenian Quarter is extremely important with its important cultural heritage. It's the place that you have historic buildings, historic churches. You have the largest manuscript collection outside Armenia. You have the largest library outside Armenia, and you have the largest museum of Armenian history outside Armenia. So to that is in itself, every inch from this quarter counts, and every inch is protected by the Armenian Patriarchate and the Armenian community of Jerusalem. That's why any land deal within this quarter is mounting to losing the Armenian identity. It threatens the Armenian existence within the old city of Jerusalem, and every Armenian now within Jerusalem and in the diaspora thinks, and for a fact actually, that Armenians are under existential threat, and I'm going to discuss that in a few minutes.
Because you mentioned that Armenians in Jerusalem are not really part of the Armenian diaspora, I was wondering if you can briefly tell us a little bit more about the relationship between Armenians in Jerusalem, Palestine, even those currently living in Israel, their relationship with Armenia, and vice versa. What is the relationship of the Armenians vis-a-vis the people living in this unique non-diaspora environment?
Of course, the Armenians of Palestine and Israel is a different case, Roberto. You have Armenians living in Jaffa and Haifa and Ramallah and Bethlehem and other places. But the Armenians of Jerusalem have a unique identity. It's a Jerusalemite Armenian identity. And their relationship is cordial with the Republic of Armenia. As a matter of fact, many of the spouses of the Armenians come from Armenia, actually, are from Armenia, due to the fact that the community is very, very small. And as a matter of fact, in the past, during the Jordanian period and even during the British period, Armenians used to get married from Armenians from Lebanon, Syria, and other places. But due to the war and due to the disconnection of the relationship, they started looking elsewhere, because the community is very small. I mean, you don't have much options. And to that extent, there's a strong relations between the Armenian Quarter and the Armenia per se. There are direct flights from Tel Aviv to Yerevan, and they fly there all the time to support Armenia, to stay in Armenia, and they have houses in Armenia and businesses. So this is an extremely important aspect for understanding. It's maybe the idea of double homeland would be applicable here too.
So let's move to the current situation. How are Armenians in Jerusalem, in Palestine, in Israel, to your knowledge, experiencing the current war in Gaza?
Of course, the current war is taking a toll on everyone within the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem. Armenians live in East Jerusalem. They are part and parcel of the Palestinian fabric, I should say. And anything that happens to Palestinians also affect directly the Armenians. But many Armenians were also shocked by the massacres that Hamas perpetrated. We should condemn that. And of course, the disproportionate answer of the Israeli military, of the IDF, which led to the killing of thousands of children. Crimes against humanity or war crimes are being perpetrated as we're talking now. It has also shocked the Armenians, dramatically. Many Armenians are not fluent in Hebrew. Actually, they watch Al Jazeera and other read Arabic newspapers and watch Arabic channels, and hence that also affects on them dramatically. But to that extent, Armenians have always tried to keep a balance within the political sphere there. Their stance is mainly the stance of the Christian churches that they take, the Latin Patriarchate, the Greek Patriarchate, and the Armenian Patriarchate. The joint statements are released when it comes to political issues dealing with the conflict. Everyone wants peace, everyone wants ceasefire in order to come out from this nightmare. So it is affecting everyone. It's affecting everyone who is involved in tourism, who's involved in, there is a lot of extremism now due to the war, settler extremism that Armenians are feeling. They're being harassed, discriminated by settlers within the Jewish quarter. So to that extent, their radicalization as a result of the war, they're radicals actually, but more radicalization as a result of the war is also affecting the Armenian physical security and physical presence within the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem.
So let's go to the Armenian Quarter and the ongoing destructions within what we call in English the Cow's Garden. Can you tell us more about the context that brought the situation to this point?
So the Cow's Garden is a historic lot where cows were kept historically to provide dairy for the Armenian patriarchate and the seminary and the priests. And that was a large area where it belonged to the Armenian Quarter, the Armenian patriarchate. And in the 1970s, the new seminary was built on the western side of the Cow's Garden, and the new seminary was built, and the other portion remained empty. And I remember as a kid, I used to play there with my friends. It's a large portion of earth, I should say, unused land. And even I fell on my head and hit my head to the floor, to the ground, and bleed. So I bled there. So I have poured my blood, I should say, on the Cow's Garden. And for decades that land has been vacant. And eventually the Armenian Patriarchate decided to turn it into a parking spot for the Armenian community of Jerusalem, which is very handy. It was a blessing, I should say, because parking in Jerusalem, as you know, Roberto, is a very difficult thing. And this made sense because the Armenian Quarter is close to the parking spot. And eventually, a few years ago, a new real estate director was appointed to the Armenian Patriarchate, a very unpopular person, I should say. Even prior to that, he was the dean of the seminary, and the seminarians were angry at him of his treatment. He has to left. He left actually the Armenian Quarter and left to the United States, and then returned back actually when the new patriarch was appointed. And he was appointed as a real estate director. The most sensitive position within the Armenian Patriarchate is the real estate director, because you're dealing with a contentious city where every deal you make, you should take into consideration the political atmosphere within the region. And this real estate director convinced the patriarch that it would be a good deal to lease the land to a new developer, Daniel Rothman from Australia, a Jewish developer. And the idea was, at the beginning, was to make a parking for the municipality. And then we suddenly heard that a hotel is going to be built there, etc., etc. Now, I want to emphasize the point that the religion or the ethnicity of the developer is not the point here. The point here is that lot is a historic land that belongs to the Armenian nation, to the Armenian community, and the Armenian Patriarchate, and it shouldn't have been leased. It shouldn't have been given to anyone, whether you are a Buddhist, whether you came from China or from Indonesia. I don't care. That's an Armenian property, and it belongs to the historic Armenian presence within the Armenian land. But given the fact that that land has been always kind of under the eyes of the Jewish Quarter or the settler movement, Ateret Kohanim or Gushimunim, etc. So there was always the fear that what if there are other people behind these deals that the Patriarchate is not aware of. So eventually within in March, this real estate director was defrocked from his position as a result of the various things. So one thing we have to also understand, Roberto, is that the Brotherhood was against the deal. When the deal was signed, 17 members of the Brotherhood sent a letter of protest to the Patriarch and the real estate director, saying that they're against the deal and that a portion of land is an important part and parcel of the Armenian Quarter and shouldn't be leased. Second thing, they said that this deal was unconstitutional because according to the constitution of the St. James Brotherhood, every deal as such needs to have the consensus and the ratification of the Holy Synod. And to that extent, neither of them were consulted in the deal. Eventually, the Patriarch realizes that there are some things, some aspects of the contract is wrong, and there are things that are fishy within the contract, and the Patriarchate now hires a lawyer from Tel Aviv to go over the contract again and see what aspects he have been misled by the real estate director, and now, based on that decision, based on the recommendations of the new lawyer, they cancel the contract. So, along all these period for 2 years, or 1 year or 2 years, the Armenian community day and night have been protesting about the deal, and they wanted the cancellation of the deal. But there are also new changes happening within the Armenian Patriarchate, as you have 2 new bishops being ordained in Armenia, which raises a lot of portfolio there too, because the Armenian Patriarchate had only 1 bishop actually. And in church history, bishops have power too. So eventually the Armenian community also, as I said, also protested. They held meetings on every Friday trying to uncover and understand the dimensions of this contract. But when the Patriarchate cancels the letter, immediately the Daniel Rothman comes from Australia, try to understand what's happening. The day that he comes, a group of settlers come with him, and with guns in their hands, with rifles and dogs, trying to assault the Armenians who were protecting the Armenian section of the Cow's Garden, which is a parking lot. In addition to this, a bulldozer comes and starts destroying the wall of the Armenian seminary, a violation without having the permit to do so, and it's by using sheer force. So when the Armenians realize that settlers are here, they start thinking that maybe this is something beyond what it is. Maybe something bigger than what it is. Because settler movement is very strong within the old city of Jerusalem. They want to occupy every small section within the old city of Jerusalem. From the larger perspective, such a deal should not have happened because East Jerusalem is an occupied territory, and you cannot make deals on an occupied territory and give it to anybody or any entity, regardless of who the person is. So settlers come with rifles and sit there for hours and hours, and they wouldn't move. Kind of what they do in Sheikh Jarrah and other places, establish a post and start expanding. The police comes, the old city police, the Krishla police, and instead of arresting the settlers for transgressing and trespassing private property, they stand with them and threaten the Armenians that they're going to be arrested. After a few days, the police comes on daily basis, threatening Armenians, and even they arrest 5 Armenians and take them to the police station, and 5 of those, I think, get 15 days house arrest. So Armenians are protecting that portion of land, the youth, Armenian priests, Armenian community members are protecting that part of the land 24/7, because they consider that the land, any violations or any losing or any deals on the land means their own destruction, that they're going to be removed from there, and this, if it becomes a settler post, etc., it means the end of the Armenian community of Jerusalem. Because it doesn't make sense to have even a hotel where you have a seminary a few meters away. what type of hotel would be near a seminary. So currently, the case is in court. The police is biased. The settler movement is there. And just to raise another important issue, that Armenians within the Armenian culture suffer periodically from harassment and from attacks by settlers and by Orthodox Jews who pass by the Armenian quarter to go to the Wailing Wall. And these harassments vary from spitting on priests, beating Armenian youth, spraying their faces with pepper sprays, to urinating on the convent door. So these are things that have been happening for years now and years with the radicalization of the right-wing governments. The police is not taking any actions, which means that the settler movement and Orthodox Jews who pass by there are enjoying impunity as settlers do within the West Bank and other places. Mind you that Armenians had never an issue with the secular Israelis, Israeli Jews. On the contrary, wherever the settlers come and beat or harass or spit, after a few weeks, a group of secular Jews come to the Armenian quarter to apologize for what the settlers have done. So this is the situation ongoing, and my fear is that with the radicalization of the right-wing government, you have today ministers there, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are really radical and ultra-nationalist, religious radical, who promote Palestinophobia, actually, or Islamophobia. These are kind of people on the street will take advantage of these and saying we have the backing of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and we can do anything. Because if you see the discourse, or if you see the conversation that was taking place when the settlers were on the Cow's Garden, the conversation was, this is our land, this whole land belongs to Israel, this is our sacred land, and you don't have anything to do there. So that's the understanding of right-wing religious settlers, that there is no such a thing as Armenian quarter. This is the land of Israel, this is the land of Jews, and etc., etc. But again, this is not the understanding of Israeli secular Jews. And I'm concerned, actually. I'm concerned about the safety of the youth of the community. I'm concerned that if, God forbid, something happens, these settlers might start shooting left and right, and our youth might go victim at a place in which settlers enjoy impunity.
And I really wanted to ask about this relationship between the settlers and the Armenian community, and you talk about it. But I was wondering, if the Armenians and the Armenian Patriarchate as an official institutions are reacting in some way other than just through, the legal system. Are there other ways in which Armenians and the institutions representing the Armenians are trying to, first of all, publicize what's happening, but also try to defend themselves beyond the legal arena?
Roberto, as long as there is no law that prohibits spitting on priests and on religious edifices, I grew up in the Muslim Quarter of Jerusalem, between the fourth and the fifth station. There's the place where Jesus put his hand in the fourth or fifth station. And from the balcony where I grew up, home, I used to see every time they would come and spit where Jesus put his hand. And there are no Christians there. The Muslims would start condemning what's happening. I see them standing there. There is no law. Armenians have complained to the Israeli government, to the Israeli police, nothing, nada. And articles were written in Haaretz. For example, Armenian famous singer Apo Sahakian wrote an article in Haaretz condemning as to what was happening. Nothing. We don't need apologies from secular Jews. We need rules and regulations to prohibit the happening and repetition of such things. And now there are cameras. You can't say that this was an allegation. There are cameras that record and depict the events that are being taken, whether it's peeing on the thing or whether it's spitting on the. 2 years ago, I was walking with a bishop near the Armenian Quarter. This religious kid came and spat on the face of the bishop, and I started fighting with him. This is unfair, and what you're doing is illegal. And so, who cares? Because they are encouraging them. I think their leaders are encouraging them that you can do that in order to create such an environment that Armenians are going to say, we can't live here anymore, and we want to leave. So creating such an environment of intoleration, of harassment and discrimination, that Armenians are going to say, well, this is difficult to live here anymore. Because what happens if the Armenians are being attacked or harassed, Armenians are answering back and they're attacking again. And now the victim becomes the victimizer here. The victim becomes the victimizer, and they're arrested and taken to the police station. These are very important things, unfortunately, the international community doesn't realize. I always say to my Jewish friends or Israeli friends, I tell them, imagine if every time a rabbi goes into the Central Park or downtown, and every time people come and spit on him, and what would be your reaction? What would be the American reaction, the CNN reaction? But here there's impunity, and Armenians don't want to provoke anything. They say, okay, don't take it personally, it happens, but until when? So Armenians are suffering a lot from settlers, I should say, from Orthodox Jews who pass by there. Even again, they come and apologize, the other group, the secular groups and secular Jews, but that's not enough. We need laws and regulations to be passed by the Israeli government that says whoever spits would take 2 years in prison or something of that sort in order to prevent this to happen. But if there are no laws and regulations, and now it's gone to another level, which is spraying the faces of Armenians with pepper spray. So that's the thing, and Armenians are always concerned because these settlers come carrying guns, etc., and they're concerned about the situation. So
now, you've been very active in the last week or so, whether on social media or on various media. But you mentioned something very important here, that the international community is, I would say, obviously looking somewhere else. Gaza, but also other situations around the world, whether the war in Ukraine, which is still ongoing, and of course various meetings, G20 and so forth. And so I was wondering, what are your expectations? Do you think the international community has a role to play for the Armenians in Jerusalem?
Yes, I think the international community has a role to play in order to protect the rights and the existence of Armenian community in Jerusalem and the Armenian Quarter of Jerusalem from existential threat. These existential threats are not only confined to the House Garden, but it also includes harassment, discrimination, intolerance from the settler movement and Orthodox Jews who pass by the Armenian Quarter, and they always, every time they pass by the quarter on daily basis, they harass Armenians, they spit on priests and etc. in order to create such an atmosphere that Armenians were going to say, we can't live in this place anymore and we have to leave this place. International community media there's a bit of media attention now as to what's happening in the Armenian Quarter. You have activists such as Hagop Jurnazian, a 22 years old young guy who is behind the movement, played an important role in the movement, studies political science, international relations at Hebrew University, and is very active and is able to bring a lot of attention. And the community now is in unison with the Patriarchate in order to protect this garden. But my fear is that, as in other cases too, Roberto, is that this will drag in the courts, and at the end of the day, we'll hear a negative news from the court, I don't know to what extent the courts are independent, especially with having an attempt by Netanyahu on the judicial reform, etc. So my fear is for the future. My fear is for the safety of the Armenians of Jerusalem. My fear is the safety of the young people of Jerusalem who are now protecting that land 24/7 with their own lives against any potential threat, whether by settlers, whether by other entities. And, so to that extent, they are continuing the fighting. And with the current, advancement of social media and technology, they are posting a lot of things on Facebook and social media. You can see live images from the stand in there. And, anytime something happens, I immediately rush and try to see what's happening on Facebook. And we have some people taking pictures and videos, and which is good because you can document all transgressions that are taking place. You can document what the police is saying. For example, the chief police comes and it's recorded, threatening everyone that he's going to arrest everyone and put them in prison. And so a community member is saying, are you going to arrest all the community members? He says, yes, I'm going to bring extra troops now. I'm going to arrest all the community members. Imagine. Again, from the police perspective also, they're becoming more radicalized given the war. And there is no toleration. There is no toleration.
I have one last question. I really want to, give you the floor in a sense that I wanted to record this podcast focusing on current events and give the listeners the possibility to understand what's going on in the Armenian Quarter, but also to sort of refocus their attentions away from Gaza, because this is happening too at the same time. So is there anything that I didn't ask, but that you want to add to the conversation?
I think you asked most of the right question, and I think the question should be asked. The question I'd like you to ask is that why Armenians are important in the Old City of Jerusalem. Armenians are important of the Old City of Jerusalem because they're part of the historic fabric of the Old City of Jerusalem. They are historical presence in Jerusalem. Their history goes back 1,500 years ago. Any change within the status quo of the Armenian Quarter would have dire effect on the future of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The Armenian Quarter plays an important role in the political future of Jerusalem. Remember, with the permanent resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, where it was, when Ehud Barak had already given, assurances, and he passed the red lines supposedly, and at the end of the day, it would come down also to where Armenian community would be, Armenian culture would be in the division in the permanent settlement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which I see we're far away, and we have put the reverse from there now. And so,
this was Bedross Der Matossian, currently Professor of Modern Middle Eastern History in the Department of History at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and author of numerous books. I just want to mention here a couple, I think very important in the current context. He's the editor of Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century, published in 2023. The Horrors of Adana, Revolution and Violence in Early 20th Century, published in 2022. And for those who are interested in Jerusalem, obviously, is one of the editor of the Routledge Handbook on Jerusalem, published in 2018. Bedross, thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Jerusalem Unplugged. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.